Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Upholding Academic Integrity, How Libraries Are Leading the AI Conversation, which is sponsored by Springer Nature. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. Now I'll just put a couple links in the chat where you can register for upcoming webinars and watch previous webinar recordings. Also, if you're interested in library technology, LibTech Insights, or LTI, is a content vertical from Choice that examines the day-to-day impact of library and education technology on academic librarians, researchers, and students. You can find out more about LTI and sign up for the weekly newsletter in via the links in the chat. Okay, so before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so no need to worry about generating noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to submit any questions or comments for our speakers. We most likely will not have time to answer all questions, so we apologize for that, but we'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation. So please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. You can also use the upvote feature to highlight questions you like or would like to be addressed. Also, there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom panel of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program, and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version and where to access today's slides. Okay, so today's webinar is presented by authors and editors of Academic Integrity and the Role of the Academic Library, Institutional Examples and Promising Practices, a 2024 monograph published by Springer Nature. And I will put a link in the chat for where you can find the book. And for the agenda for today, we'll start with the welcome and introduction. Then we'll hear from Jason and Josh, who will talk about the evolving nature of academic integrity and the role of academic librarians in promoting integrity. Then we'll move to Erin and Jane, who will provide an example of this work in practice at their institution, Memorial University. Next, Josh and Jason will look at focus areas and benchmarks in this area, and then we'll close with a Q&A with the audience. And with that, we're ready to get started, so I will hand it over to Jason.
Good afternoon, everyone. Josh is in Manitoba, and Aaron and Jane are in Newfoundland. I am in Medicine Hat, Alberta, which is home to the world's largest teepee. It was built for the 1988 Winter Olympics in Calgary. It would be hard to capture all of the peoples and treaties included within these various locations, but we'd like to start by acknowledging Call to Action 69 of Canada's Truth and Reconciliation Report, which specifically asks libraries, museums, and archives to re-examine their commitment to truth and reconciliation and commit more resources to sharing the true history of Indigenous peoples with their communities. In our various local contexts, we're very grateful for the opportunities that we have to engage in the work of reconciliation with our Indigenous friends, neighbors, colleagues, and students. My job in the next 5 minutes is to set the stage for understanding academic integrity in higher education. Because of limited time, I am going to speak in big, bold strokes and ignore a lot of nuance. But I also need to mention that I am presently, even though I'm not presently serving in a library, I am a librarian for life, and I have the paperwork to prove it. I am not an imposter, and it's nice to be amongst my colleagues, my library colleagues. For over 20 years, I've said that the MLIS is an incredibly valuable and versatile degree, and I feel that way now more than ever. The first thing I want to say about academic integrity is that we need to approach academic integrity with a level head. We can't freak out. Concerns about academic integrity are nothing new, And one of the chapters in the book details the steps taken to ensure that unfair collaboration did not take place during civil service exams in China. In 2015, Winrow pulled together a list of all of the quantitative studies on academic integrity that had been completed around the world. These are mostly self-reported studies, which is a very simple methodology. You ask a bunch of students, did you or did you not commit an academic integrity violation while you were in school? I did. Protected by anonymity, students say yes or no. And these numbers establish that academic integrity violations are global, they're widespread, they predate artificial intelligence. In some places, you might wonder, how much worse could it get? Even though commonplace, widespread, and that academic integrity has been going on for a while, this is deadly serious business for post-secondary institutions. Academic integrity violations undermine the signal value of post-secondary credentials and may be a contributing factor to declining support for public education. We also have a composite portrait, if you will, of what influences academic integrity behavior. This infographic, inspired by the cartoons of my childhood, pulls together the literature on why students engage or do not engage in academic integrity violations. Men are more likely to cheat in school than females, especially if they're under the age of 25. Overall, age and maturity play a positive role in academic integrity behavior, and students commit academic integrity violations for lots of reasons. Some of them we recognize. There's a lot of pressure to succeed. And this pressure to succeed can be compounded for international students. There are rewards to be gained. Some of them are less visible to us. Some individuals commit academic integrity violations simply because of the thrill of doing so. It's like a rich person shoplifting. On the other hand, lots of students don't commit academic integrity violations because it goes against their ethical beliefs and their learning goals. I think this graphic is also useful for considering generative artificial intelligence because we can pinpoint specifically where some of the new and emerging concerns are located. Generative artificial intelligence provides more opportunity to be dishonest. Students will probably get away with it because right now the best estimates that are only 1% of academic integrity only 1% of academic integrity violations get caught. Social norms. This is an area under some transition. Some students aren't sure. Some faculty encourage the use of generative AI while some forbid it. And so policies are often vague, inconsistent, and perhaps out of date. Is it is it plagiarism to use generative AI? Is it okay to use Grammarly? What is appropriate and ethical use? And this is a theme that runs throughout the various chapters of the book. And there was a study just released yesterday or the day before showing that students often do exercise their ethical beliefs when using generative AI. Since 2017 or so, my main focus has been on assessment. And this is one of the connections with librarianship because librarians, based on the conversations that I've had, have seen a lot of bad research assignments. So let's make assessments better and proceed with that work with all haste through faculty collaborations. Even before AI entered the scene, more and more focus was on assessment. Exams and research papers are still the most heavily used forms of assessment, and they're also the assessments where we see the most amount of violations. It's kind of an obvious, if overlooked, fact that for students to cheat or plagiarize, they have to cheat or plagiarize on something. So let's change the nature of the game by changing the nature of the assessment to neutralize students' desire and their opportunities to be dishonest. That's good as far as it goes, but it doesn't go very far. Assessment, just like libraries, is connected to everything else pictured here. Tracy Bertag described post-secondary education as an ecosystem under extreme stress. And what is represented here are some of the macro forces impacting assessment. And you can draw a direct line between any one of these and libraries and academic integrity. As only one example, 50% of all faculty in the United States and Canada are part-time, and part-time faculty are the least likely to know the whys and the hows of assessment. This is important. This is an important consideration because when libraries approach faculty collaboration on assessments, part-time faculty are distant from the institution and may be difficult to reach and collaborate with. As another example, institutions may continue to spend more on academic integrity technology, such as ineffective detectors, or by purchasing supplier-led chatbots and AI solutions, further displacing their ability to spend on library resources, especially at a time of funding stagnation and increasing class sizes. And academic integrity becomes more likely in depersonalized learning environments. So we now add generative artificial intelligence to an environment already under stress. This webinar is not primarily about generative AI, but generative AI will be a main topic or a subtopic no matter where we go for some time. It's going to be like the internet in 1995 through 1997, or Google and the death of reference services, that conversation that took place in 1999, 2000, or what Kindle did to library collections since 2007. This webinar is not about those things, but it is in part about technological change. And libraries and librarians, based on my 25-year involvement with them, have grown increasingly adaptable because the digital shift forced them to abandon or modify just about everything: staffing levels and skills, space, collections, services. No part of the library remains unchanged, including the profession's attitudes and orientation to change. But what does this have to do with libraries? In short, everything. Academic integrity, especially right now, is a problem that many institutions don't know how to solve. But librarians have been involved in this space as informants, counselors, educators, detectors, and policy advisors. My experience is that librarians also lead best through collaboration, and librarians have the skills and the approach to help their institutions figure out how to move forward. And so, for a more thorough understanding of the role academic librarians play in promoting academic libraries, in promoting academic integrity, I'm going to hand this over to Josh. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. I think the title of the next slide here was a question that one of Jason's professors asked him as a student in his program. What is library work? And he described it here in the subtitle as a fiendishly difficult question, and I think it remains the same way today. So we're just going to look at a few of the evolving challenges of academic integrity. So whether you're in a college or a university in Canada, the US, or elsewhere, academic integrity is tied to the credibility of an institution and its credentials. Higher education institutions are a place where students learn ethical citizenship and develop habits that they then bring into their fields after they graduate. For research institutions in particular, it's associated with the integrity of research and knowledge production. So libraries are often tasked, as most of us who work in libraries know, with providing one-shot sessions on transversal skills that everyone wants, but no one seems to teach. And historically, we have helped with academic writing, especially with things like citing, referencing, and plagiarism. Many have also been involved with remedial aspects related to plagiarism. One of Vanessa Earp's 2 chapters in the book, for example, talks about this. So there is an established track record of academic libraries being involved in some ways with some aspects of academic integrity, and the book looks to do a deep dive into that. So on this slide, when I say we're more than a passive collection, we were once gatekeepers to physical warehouses of knowledge measured in volumes held in circulation statistics. Learners had no choice but to come to us, institutions to fund us, and staff could sit and wait for people to come to them. But we have a need to continue to evolve using connection, integration, and flexibility. And just as libraries adjusted to the Web 1.0 stages of the World Wide Web, as Jason alluded to, we need to do the same in the midst of Web 3.0. Learners can now personalize and analyze data as never before. And some of the book chapters dig into librarians as instructional designers and blended professionals. So today's platforms are not limited to the reference desk. I would say learn your learning management system, learn OERs, learn some of these new Gen AI tools. And people are looking right now for certainty and guidance in the age of AI as the nature of information, research, and its ethical use are being redefined. So to me, academic integrity in 2025 is not your grandpa's plagiarism. So if we look at information literacy specifically as a gateway, our hosts here, ACRL, their framework for information literacy in higher ed is a great springboard for new pedagogies and gateways into academic discourse and ethical knowledge production. Information literacy instruction and frameworks need to continue to evolve, however. Evaluating AI-generated content for credibility, bias, and authorship, the ethical use of AI tools, and attribution and citing in AI-influenced writing will have to be dealt with. Info-lit and academic integrity, to me, are intertwined. Education and awareness have always been part of what we do. The ethical edge of info-lit elevates it beyond simply mechanics to the ongoing practice of integrity and discernment. And the third bullet point here with a citation by our friend Jenny Miron from up in Canada at Humber College should reinforce academic libraries to feel comfortable in our leadership place with the topic. So advocate for scaffolded and sustained space and curriculum rather than that dreaded one-shot, which now seems even more pedagogically absurd in 2025. If we're thinking beyond plagiarism, there's lots of literature about how libraries have become involved in academic misconduct supports, which means after a problem arises. So the book cites research about and gives example of how we can be proactive. So from collaborating on assessments, which close loopholes for academic misconduct, to offering academic integrity education for stakeholders and advising on policy. While we could still be involved in remedial measures, like in, again, one of Vanessa's chapters on what they call plagiarism school, we can also be a place that students and staff can look to for not only proactive help, but one that focuses on skill building and understanding rather than punishment. Focusing solely on plagiarism rather than building off of our successes there limits our potential. So other types of academic misconduct include things like collusion, which is covered in the Campbell et al. Chapter of the book, contract cheating, data fabrication, and now unauthorized use of AI tools. So I've personally often found that assessment design strategies for one type of academic misconduct are effective against many others, meaning that there's certain things people can do in assessment design that might close some loopholes for something like plagiarism, has also been effective against other types of academic misconduct. And then lastly here, embedding places library staff directly in the teaching and learning process. Chapters by Shannon Moist and the authors who are joining us today from Newfoundland have more details on this. And it could be things like course shells, curriculum committees, or faculty development programs. So when we're talking about moving from a support role to leadership, academic librarians in the book and elsewhere are transitioning from what might be described as passive support roles to active contributors in helping shape institutional policy and culture. So our unique position of being widely connected, widely informed, and academically neutral helps bridge gaps across academic, administrative, and student stakeholder groups. Post-pandemic academic realities and AI disruptions mean that institutions need to revisit what are probably now outdated policies, and libraries can facilitate or even lead these revisions and discussions. And then lastly here on this slide, the AI era and even the years preceding demand a paradigm shift. I would say don't just keep up, lead. Don't just survive, thrive. From developing AI literacy to establishing best practices for Gen AI use, libraries are the ethical backbone of this evolution. Academic libraries are at the very least participants, but can also be catalysts for academic integrity in this age of disruption. Then when we look at outreach and professional development, so what I'm talking about here with existing outside of the physical library is let's be ubiquitous, let's be visible, let's be present. We aren't in a position, again, where we can passively wait for people to come and access our monopolized information in 2025. Departments, committees, working groups, and again, the LMS are all examples of places outside of the desks and stacks that academic librarians can be. When we're talking about upskilling and retraining, that's not only for others, but ourselves. Digital literacy is changing and leaders are being sought in this area. The third citation on this slide was interesting, and I've read similar things in regards to school libraries. If formal training doesn't exist, we have some options to get it going, including communities of practice, just to name one. And then sometimes in times of change, like the shift to emergency remote learning that we experienced during the pandemic, staff stakeholders are met with more expectations than they are support. This isn't just a student issue, but staff will also be looking forward to learning opportunities related to evolving academic integrity subjects. There's lots of opportunities for intra and cross-institutional PD. And then lastly here, outreach and collaboration to me are no longer ancillary. They're essential to embedding academic integrity in an institutional culture. This helps libraries remain central and shifts the narrative from talking about the library to libraries talking with their learners. Then when I'm looking at some challenges and identity tensions that were covered in some of the chapters of the book, there is value and tradition to being removed from the traditional power structures of academia, such as grading or academic discipline, and instead being a supportive and non-judgmental resource for all of our learners. Is it this that would make students willing to ask vulnerable questions to a librarian? Is neutrality always possible or even desirable in the face of institutional pressures and ethical challenges? And then in her chapter, Vanessa Earp, who's a librarian down at Kent State in Ohio, asks about the inadvertent reframing of libraries as an agent of discipline rather than one of support. So could this be another example of not limiting involvement to academic misconduct, but rather also looking at academic integrity? Could we not also apply our expertise as academic misconduct becomes more complex? The tension to me lies in finding the balance between authority and advocacy. And I'll hand it over.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So Jane and I work at Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador, located in St. John's, Newfoundland, which we stated from the beginning. Just wanted to set the stage for a little bit for you. So picture the colorful row houses and puffins and whales and icebergs. That's us. We're lucky enough to live and work here. Come visit. It's a nice place. Memorial University, that's the image of the library as you kind of walk in the main entryway, has an FTE of roughly 18,000 students, and about 30% of those are international students. Okay. So those of us working in academic libraries, has been sort of stated already, have been grappling with things related to academic integrity for a long time, but we typically don't do it alone. We do so in conjunction with colleagues in other academic support units, and that's especially true at Memorial, where we work. So at MUN, the library system is an academic unit. Our librarians and archivists are academic staff members, but we are also an academic support unit and work very collaboratively with the other academic support units at our institution to support students, faculty, and staff. CITL, or the Center for Innovation in Teaching and Learning, where Jane works, is an academic support unit too, and they work with the librarians and other units to support instructors and students in numerous aspects of teaching and learning. Efforts focus on educating about and preventing academic misconduct through course design and delivery supports. We, in the libraries, along with other units on campus, such as the Registrar's Office, the Academic Advising Center, and our Writing Center, have long worked together, and about 10 years ago now, leaned very heavily on each other in developing something called Integrity 1000, which is a required course that all undergraduates have had to take for since about 2007. Jane?
Great. Yeah, the mute button. So Jason mentioned earlier some reasons why students cheat, and when we were over the last few years, between the library and some of us here at CITL, we started noting as well, looking at literature and from things that students were telling us and instructors were telling us, other reasons why students cheat. So some of the things that we found were because they procrastinate, they just leave things too late and essentially start running out of time. There's a lack of understanding of the assignment itself, and they don't seek that clarity for a variety of different reasons. They're just not engaged with the course. They're there, but they are doing the minimal amount of work, and they're really not very interested in it. Again, that relates to the interest in the subject or the assignment itself. Workload and schedule. More and more these days, students are working part-time jobs, or in some cases they work full-time jobs and study part-time. And this is because of the cost of going to higher education, which is not just the tuition, but also relates to the cost of living within university and college communities. And then, of course, we noticed for some time that there is a great amount of poor information literacy skills. And the library has certainly taken on several initiatives to try to counter that over the years. So, so next we want to look at how we work together. So we being primarily the library and the instructional designers and educator developers at CITL, but also some of the other parties and support units throughout the university. So you'll see here that we have the students and the instructors, and sandwiched in between are these various academic units, librarians, the educator developers and instructional designers, people from the registrar's office, and student support centers, such as like the writing center we mentioned earlier. And through a variety of different committees and working groups and working on projects and working on courses with the faculty and helping students in supporting their teaching and learning, their learning experience, we're often collaborating or working individually with these people. So sometimes the academic units will have specific statements about academic or professional integrity. There could be statements about codes of conduct, or even reminders on their main homepage to refer students to the library resources on academic integrity. The libraries have academic integrity guides that we often point students to. There's the academic integrity quiz, which is separate from the tutorial that Aaron mentioned, which is the Integrity 1000. They provide a variety of different services, such as finding services, library research essential skills or citations, and they provide workshops to the students and will sometimes go into classes with a focused presentation for a particular class. And they also have an academic integrity checklist. So as part of the conversations that we have with faculty when we're designing and developing the courses, we'll remind them of these things and ask them which, if any, do they want to highlight or bring to the students' attention in their course and their syllabus or at the time of the assessments as they appear throughout the semester. At CITL, we also have some instructional resources on academic integrity amongst our instructional resources that cover a wide range of topics for teaching in higher education. And of course, the registrar's office, they touch upon academic integrity, in the Student Code of Rights and Responsibilities. There's an undergrad academic misconduct statement in the calendar, and of course there is one in the grad calendar as well. And a few of the other support centers, the Writing Center, have a website on what is academic integrity. Student Life, which is related to the Writing Center, they have information there as well. And they also are associated with the Academic Success Center, which runs MUN-UP, and the topic there is learning skills resources. And of course, then there's the first year information. So as you can see, there's a lot of different resources that we have in place, and there may be very minimal overlap, but overall, these things all complement each other very well for providing resources to our students. Aaron.
Okay, so as we were considering writing the chapter in this book, and about how we work together. So it's not just about sort of how we've kind of colluded over the years and all of these different things. We wanted to kind of go back and reflect on a lot of the foundational documents, some of them mentioned already, the frameworks, the theories that we generally apply to our work. You are doubtless familiar with most of what's written here. Maybe not everybody in terms of some of the instructional design resources, but some of the others you will be. So I'll elaborate a little bit on those two now, about how they're key to everything that we do. Okay. Integrity 1000 has been a required course, as I mentioned, for undergraduates of MUN since 2017. Our colleague, Wendy Rogers, and I were not the original authors of the course, but we have been developing the course and updating the content every year since then. The International Center for Academic Integrity Fundamental Values document came along in the early stages of our work here, and we find the simplicity in the terms of expressing these values as cornerstones that we repeat throughout our course. The guidance in this document around applying these values holistically appears to have a positive influence on students. Integrity 1000 makes several mentions of how the values of academic integrity apply to their professors and the overall academic community, and not just them. Trust and fairness being great examples here. So the ICA document is a really foundational document for us, and it speaks to the collaborative work that we do and how academic integrity is our shared responsibility. More recently, Wendy Rogers and I have developed something that we're calling GATE, which is a graduate academic integrity tutorial. And we've drawn heavily on the framework, and this has already come up, of course. Josh has mentioned the framework. The very idea that academic integrity is a threshold concept in and of itself shouldn't be a huge leap for this audience, I don't think. And as we contend in our chapter, a student who is information literate is much less likely to fall into the traps of academic misconduct. The frames were particularly useful to consider as we were developing this course. And we worked again with Jane and with other colleagues of hers, instructional design and support, in creating this online module. And of course, we use this in most everything that we do where teaching is concerned. But the frames really do lend themselves well to graduate students in those contexts. They are much more ready to accept themselves as creators of information, and that they are participating in the scholarly conversation. So the theoretical frameworks behind everything that we've done have been very powerful in how we work on this academic integrity, I guess, umbrella, and also how we collaborate.
Okay, so one of the other models or frameworks that we use in the course design process here is a modified version of the Quality Matters rubric, which we use the standards for developing online courses for higher education. Now, a lot of the information found in the standards, even though this one is for online education, a lot of it still applies to your on-campus or your multimodal, your hybrid courses as well. So interestingly, the main 8 standards are here, and each standard has a variety has several levels underneath it. And what I wanted to draw your attention to is that there are a few explicit mentions or references to academic integrity and a few others that are implied. So under the learning outcomes or the competencies, which is the second standard, there 2.4 talks about the relationship between learning objectives, learning activities, and assessments, and the need for that to be made clear. And as part of that, it also talks to how you need to build the assessments so that students are given a chance to have fair assessment and one that promotes their academic integrity. Under number 3, assessment and measurement, there were a couple of items. The course grading policy needs to be clearly stated, and it needs to be consistent throughout the course site. And then there 3.3, specific or descriptive criteria provided for evaluation of the learner's work and their connection to the course grading policy is clearly explained. Again, students need to know, they need to understand the task. They need to know what it is they're expected to do, and generally how they're expected to show that they know that they've learned what was covered in the course, but also how they're going to be assessed. The better understanding they have of this up front, the less chance of them delving into academic misconduct. Under the instructional materials, it explicitly states that the course models academic integrity expected of learners by providing both source references and permissions for use of instructional materials. Now, all the materials, when the instructors come to us to help get their courses developed, we remind them that anything that they have not written themselves, they need to cite or reference. And then we choose whichever style is appropriate, whether it's MLA or Harvard or APA, and we format all of the content in the course according to that particular style guide. And then the last one that I wanted to bring attention to was the learner support, where course instructions articulate or link to the institution's academic support services and resources that can help learners succeed in the course. Again, some of these resources deal with supports that are in place to help them with their learning and their assessments, and then hopefully help encourage them stay on the path of academic integrity. And the final item there, course instructions articulate or link to the institution's student services and resources that can help learners succeed. So that again is related to the same thing, making sure that there's supports there for students. Okay, so with this one, advice to instructors. So we have some specific suggestions for advice, and we wouldn't mind hearing some other ideas as well down the road. So explore existing resources at the library and teaching and learning centers. So here could mean involving librarians in classes, pointing students to library resources, using the instructional resources to help guide your work. In terms of discussions and reminders, it's important for the instructors to talk about what academic integrity means in that particular course's context and generally. Instructors should outline their philosophy, librarians as well, when they're invited to attend classes, should do the same and talk about their approach towards maintaining academic integrity. Remind students to revisit this prior to assessment due dates. So even though you may talk about it at the beginning of the semester or the term, you should remind students to revisit it before their papers or their assignments are due. In terms of policies and requirements in the syllabus, so it's a good idea to put in links, ideally friendly links, to reference various policies, calendar items, or resources that are in place throughout your institution. If you do encounter any questionable work from students, you need to follow, instructors need to follow the policies that they have that have been articulated by the institution, as well as that have been articulated in the course syllabus with the students, and to let students know that infractions have been identified and they're being dealt with, so that they know and they believe that you are taking this seriously and you expect them to as well. Then one thing that we spend a lot of time doing is designing assessments that make cheating harder. For example, you could add critical literacy to some of the assignments, focus assessments on higher order cognitive levels, and focus on the learning process rather than the product. And sometimes that involves smaller assignments, scaffold assignments, more regular feedback, but it's about the learning. And so the last, we have stay on top of current literature on academic integrity. For example, just the other day, I came across a really nice video tutorial on critical AI literacy, the impact of generative AI on literacy, and it was by one of our colleagues here, Cecile Badenhorst, and it was pretty good. And most of all, you need to be proactive. The more that instructors and we all can prepare and provide information and educate our students, the lesser chance of them falling into academic misconduct. Anything to add, Erin? Okay.
Right, so a couple of patterns that emerged in the book, and maybe even more so after the book had been written and then published. One is the impact of one AI on the other. I kind of missed the days where I could say AI and it meant academic integrity, but I think artificial intelligence won that unannounced battle. So academic integrity has been part of the artificial intelligence discussion in education since the start, but there is so much more to it than potential student cheating or misconduct. Enhanced educational tools and experiences are developing daily, which blur the boundaries of things like authorship, new types of academic misconduct, and instructional gaps without clear guidelines or proactive education. And our institutions are facing infrastructure pressures and equity issues, just to name two that are related. So for those of us who've been in the library field for 20, or in Jason's case, 25, and maybe there's some people on the call that have been involved for longer, we're now seeing a second paradigm shift in how information is created, consumed, and understood. In a potentially even more learner-centered environment, we really need to abandon that outdated gatekeeper mindset to one of being navigators and facilitators of ethical and personalized learning. So I'm putting a link into chat to an article that I just read the other day. A lot of institutions are using a stoplight system, or there's an artificial intelligence assessment scale by Perkins et al. To help students see if, how, and when they can use AI tools. But the article I put the link to talks about how that's not enough, right? If you're still handing out the same essay that you've used since the 1990s, some kind of obscure guidance on AI that you yourself may not even understand, it isn't enough. So it just reminded me the other day of this saying from the Soviet Union where they said, we pretend to work and they pretend to pay us. And I think if we don't properly adjust, as they talk about in that article I pasted the link to, it's just going to become, we pretend to teach and they pretend to learn. It's just this academic dance of students handing in things that are written by AI for an assignment that can be, done with the touch of a button, and no learning has taken place and no teaching has taken place. So when we look at risks to academic integrity, AI tools have been with us for a while now and gradually have shifted the norms around things like original thought, academic authorship, and even effort. Gen AI has been like a quantum leap comparatively, and maybe we shouldn't be too hard on ourselves for feeling like we can't keep up. It changes every day. The citation in the middle here from Walcott et al. Talked about Web 2.0 blurring the boundaries between consumers and producers of content, whereas Web 3.0, which is where we're at with Gen AI, obliterates these same boundaries. This creates gray zones in the concept of integrity and related policies which were designed for a pre-AI world. So we can extend our existing library literacies in the AI world to maintain academic integrity. So things like evaluating Gen AI outputs, transparency, and new capabilities are just some examples. If we or higher ed as a whole focus only on detecting academic misconduct, we are absolutely going to stagnate in a reactive position. Some skills and learning outcomes will have to become something else. And as the authors from the chapter in our book, we're talking about process is more important now than ever over product. So on the next slide, instruction and policy are two of what I would think are our biggest levers. Librarians have always bridged the gap between learners and new technologies. That goes for academic libraries, school libraries, and maybe some of the other types. All of our learners are looking for guidance as well as collaborative partners in assessment redesign and policy content. When NICTA, the third bullet point on that slide, is talking about a new breed of information intermediaries, I would add to that, anticipate rather than wait. Drive that strategic change and navigate this uncertainty that we live in with agility. Some ideas about owning the AI agenda would be just draft some usage guidelines for AI and learning, or suggest and participate in that process just to get it started. Think about and communicate the disclosure and citation of AI tools, ensure alignment with institutional values, and try to make that institution that you're in future ready. To me, instruction is a tool for both visibility and value. To lead with learning, we can offer ongoing PD design, interactive modules, micro-credentials, and really leverage instructional design and the tech savviness of blended librarianship to create what could be immersive and relevant learning experiences. And then lastly, when we're looking at institutional alignment and some of the opportunities, academic librarians can be architects of change by engaging early, being co-creators of institutional culture, and demonstrating value beyond simple service delivery and resource management. So we can map library plans to our institutional strategic goals and use language and metrics that resonate with institutional leadership. This makes us visible, this makes us measurable, and this makes us fundable. So we can prioritize programs, partnerships, and services that meet the current needs of your learners while also anticipating the future. So using data, learning analytics to identify gaps and opportunities, asking yourself, what does the library do? But more importantly, who does it help and how? So from support to leadership, what I'm talking about here is creating and or stepping into strategic leadership positions to help shape the future rather than reactively supporting it. And the last piece there, Phil Dawson from Australia has this awesome quote talking about prepare students for their future, not our past. So things will change with or without our approval, with or without our participation, but we can have a say in how they do.
Thank you. I'd like to conclude our presentation. We will have some time for questions in about 5 minutes. I'll try to do my best to keep this short. I'd like to conclude our presentation by very quickly going through a series of benchmarks that academic libraries can use to diagnose their academic integrity efforts and plan strategically for the future. These benchmarks are based on what many academic libraries are already doing. They were pulled out of the chapter. And I chose benchmarks because it's a fitting word, because it does give us the ability to do what Josh was just talking about, which is evaluate, measure, and plan some key spheres of activity. So the first, really looking externally, is networks. So as they exist, the academic library is connected and integrated with academic integrity networks at the state, provincial, national, or international levels, such as the International Center for Academic Integrity, the Global Academic Integrity Network, the European Academic Integrity Network, or, there's one chapter that's on Ireland, the Ireland Academic Integrity Network, or Manitoba, the Manitoba Academic Integrity Network. Academic integrity campaigns. So connected to networks, the library participates in academic integrity awareness raising campaigns such as the International Day of Action for Academic Integrity and Academic Integrity Week. And this would be similar to the leadership role that many libraries have played with Open Education Week. Then we start to move to the institution, the internal frame. Institutional leadership. The library leads or is part of collaborative campus leadership efforts to promote and support academic integrity at their post-secondary institution. Librarians are uniquely positioned because they hear concerns from students, they hear concerns from faculty, and they have a lot to offer in guiding new approaches to student instruction, orientation, and assessment. Policy development. So flowing directly from this leadership role, the library is active in the development of academic integrity policy, including consulting on definitions for plagiarism, collusion, and the appropriate use of generative artificial intelligence. International students and intercultural competence. Over the past year, both the US and Canada have had high-profile disruptions to international students, and international students require some consideration and sensitivity because library staff have received professional development in intercultural competence. They can then identify Western pedagogical approaches. They can appreciate different cultural conceptions to textual ownership and consider the unique tactics of international students when they inadvertently commit acts of academic integrity violations such as patch writing. So moving into the library frame, staffing, the responsibility for the library's efforts in academic integrity are clearly articulated in at least one librarian or library staff member's job description. And this would be similar to the way that many academic libraries now have a copyright and a scholarly communications library. High quality instructional programs. This is a staple of library activity, but like Aaron and Jane were sharing, it's possible for the library to provide credit and or non-credit academic integrity instruction. Because I've been involved with assessment for so long, I'm well aware of the arguments for and against grading. And all I'll say right now is that credit or graded work communicates to students the importance of some things. And so having credit or graded work can communicate to students the importance of academic integrity. And that's an area that often doesn't take place. So much like we talked about, instructional efforts can be proactive and reactive, as well as, in those reactive point of need contexts. The content of the programs needs to include critical digital literacy and artificial intelligence as it pertains to information use and knowledge generation. And these instructional programs can use real practical situations that students will likely face on their educational journeys. And one example from the book is a chapter that includes a number of real life simulated role plays from Australia. Professional development and scholarly activity. Library staff recently and regularly participate at academic integrity conferences. They're engaged in researching their academic integrity efforts. Right now, we know a lot about what people are doing, and we don't know a lot about what is effective. Sarah Elaine Eaton has shown that academic integrity has tremendous research potential. And then knowledge resources. The library publishes guides for faculty and students outlining how the library can support efforts to address academic integrity. This might include recommended language for syllabi, research papers. Close collaboration to the institutional teaching and learning center is important here, especially for new course and new program development. I do not believe that this list of benchmarks is complete, and it's something that I'm still continuing to play with, but it does provide a series of important activities that libraries can use for strategic planning and determining where or how they have the greatest impact on their learning communities. Where and how do they want to uh, try to move the needle a little bit? Where do they want to allocate more resources? So with that, I'd like to say thank you everyone for coming today. I'd really like to say it's just a real honor to be part of the panel with Josh, Jane, and Aaron, and thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thanks, everyone. We have about 8 minutes left for questions, so we'll jump right in to some questions. Also, there'll be a brief couple poll questions showing up on your screen, so for attendees, so feel free to fill that out. Okay, let's start with David's question. A huge question slash topic, but following up from Peter's question, I wonder if the participants could speak to the tension, perhaps an intractable one, between the ACRL frame that information has value with the apparent devaluing or revaluing to fodder of copyrighted sources created by authors of all types that every Gen AI tool was trained on. I believe this tension has not been sufficiently addressed at the institutional level in PSE, I think post-secondary education.
Yeah, I think you're right, David. I think it kind of goes beyond the scope of the book, but some of the things that I would mention is that I had a good colleague recently talk about how generative AI is similar to a light switch. That light was something that was hard, it was expensive, it was difficult, but then all of a sudden the light, and with that came a lot of light pollution. And that's exactly what's happened with this. And so we now have, it's very easy to generate a lot of content. So information has value, but not all of that information has value. And so how do we find the value information? Well, that goes right back to some of the things that libraries have typically used in their instruction, like the CRAP test. Like, how do we know that this thing has value? Um, so that's one way. That's one way to look at it. And I saw Josh just raise his hand, so I'm going to stop talking and let him go.
Yeah, that's a tough one to figure out on the spot. Two thoughts I had related to that. One would be that there's financial value, but then there's value for knowledge in itself. And a big question like that, I think, is a good example of there. I don't think there is a monolithic answer from all libraries about things like that, just as there hasn't been with open access movement before it, but even just leading the discussion, getting that as part of the conversation. Because again, I think when people talk about AI, there's way too much focus on students are using it to cheat. That's to be a very small piece of it. There's a lot of good that can come from it, but then there's all these ethical questions too that very few people are asking, and there's a lot of outward pointing fingers at students and not a lot of self-reflection and introspection from post-secondary.
Sure. Jane and Aaron, anything to add there?
I would just add, I feel like my tune hasn't changed really. Like feel like I've been teaching or helping students to question everything for a really long time. It's no different than if somebody runs an Airbnb and then they have all their family members leave really excellent reviews of that Airbnb. In some ways, students need to think about the things that they're consuming and think about the information that they're taking in those same ways. Question everything that you're seeing, like what is the source and how can you determine whether or not that is a valuable thing. It goes along with exactly with what Josh was saying about the value of the information, not just for the sake of the transaction that you're having in your life or in your research or in your education. Right?
Yeah, your question will have profound impact on course design, especially like online courses, which have used discussions for a long time. It now takes seconds to create, a 200 to 300 word post on a topic that directly responds to an instructor, and it takes the student maybe 2 minutes to add some of their own personal language to it and then submit it. So these discussion questions that have long been part of online learning environments, they don't have value either. And so it'll impact instructional design for sure.
Yeah, there's actually a fair bit of pushback from instructors on the use of discussion forums now for that very reason, that they're just not meaningful, and the students, some of them take shortcuts with them. So we need better ways to craft the questions in the discussions, and to use that information then to feed into other assessments. And then you all touched on it, but I think also in dealing with being able to sift through the fodder, comes back to teaching students information literacy and digital literacy skills. And if they can assess things and make an informed decision as to whether or not what they're taking from the shelf is appropriate for their work, then I think that will help in some ways.
Great. Okay. We have time for one or two more. We just got a question from Philip. Is it ever ethical to use Gen AI models that were trained using illegally accessed material? That seems to be the heart of what our audience is thinking about. Does anyone want to tackle that? Oh, Josh, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, I think it depends on the person. I remember Napster, and I sure was excited to download things that I didn't want to pay, $50 for an obscure demo tape that I've been looking for 20 years anymore. So I think it really depends on the person's ethics.
What I think it speaks to too is the importance of teaching students what these tools are and how they operate. So much of our lives are interoperating with tools that we don't understand. And where's the magic? And I think based on what I've seen so far, there's not a lot of direct instruction about what these tools are, how they operate, how they were built. And so that's a really great question to ask students. I mean, I think that asking that question to students so that students can engage with that question is just a applied ethics. I mean, that's just amazing to think about that, because many, like, which ones, so I think it's just great. I think it's a learning opportunity.
Great. Yeah, and it looks like we are right at the end of the hour, so I will say thanks so much to Jason, Josh, Jane, and Aaron for taking the time to speak with us today, and thank you to our attendees for your questions and your comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording and where to access the slides. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the webinar and hope to see you again soon on another session.
Thanks.